Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our series on urban energy modeling with Dragonfly. And in the previous video, we built this urban scale energy model of a kind of high density urban district of skyscrapers. You can see here in the Rhino scene. We built this using building solids, closed building solids that we had in our Rhino file here. Um, and I said at the end of this video that we have a Dragonfly model here that you can translate over into GeoJSON and send off to an energy simulation with UrbanOpt, just as we have done in previous videos. But there are a few things, a few properties about this model that I'm not quite satisfied with in terms of the way that I'm simulating, and some things that I want to tweak before I actually go and send this off to simulation. So first thing is first, you may have already realized we don't have any windows at all in this model yet. Right? That we all that we simply did was create these Dragonfly building objects, and yes, they're divided up into stories, and they have programs and construction sets assigned to them, but there are no windows assigned to that. So, in order to make sure that I have windows on these buildings, I'm going to grab the same component that we use, this df apply facade parameters, and I'm going to drop this onto the canvas. Maybe I'll make a little bit more room here. And you'll see, right, we can assign window parameters to these buildings if I simply connect the buildings to the Dragonfly objects. You know what? I also just realized that to make it easier for everybody to follow along, I'm just going to I haven't been using the same little utility that I used in previous videos, right? So this way you can actually see what the names of the components are as I also have the icons here. So all right, so I've connected up my objects, my building objects, to this Dragonfly apply facade parameters. I'm going to use the same simple window parameters that I used in the previous video, these window ratio parameters. But maybe I'll say for these residential buildings that are kind of on the smaller side, residential buildings tend to have smaller windows, if only for the privacy of the occupants. So I'm going to use a lower ratio for these residential building solids that I have here. Let's say we'll set those to 0.25 window ratio, and I'm going to plug that into this component. I'm going to get some window parameters that represent those conditions out of this, and I'm going to assign those to my buildings here. Right, and so now I'm getting Dragonfly objects, Dragonfly residential building objects that have been edited out of this component. And those same objects are what I can take and plug into my Dragonfly model just as I had previously. Now you'll see I connected those up and it disconnected the commercial ones. But that's because I want to do the same exact thing for those commercial buildings, but with a little bit of a twist. So, all right, so let me clean this up a little bit here so that we have just the window ratios being assigned in this way. So you guys remember we went through this effort to assign different floor to floor heights for the various commercial buildings that we have in our model here. And we did that kind of with the understanding that the lowest floor, the first floor of this building, probably has a different type of usage, probably has a different setup and way that it will be used from the rest of the building. And in particular, that could be, we have retail on the ground floor, or maybe some restaurants or something like that, as opposed to the offices that we might expect in the rest of the building. So, in fact, why don't I'm going to just preview our buildings right here that we have, our commercial buildings, right? And the one thing you'll notice, though, is that we haven't really set up the model in a way that, if we're actually truly serious about simulating this ground story as retail, we should have a different program, because right now it's just applying this large office to the entirety of the building. And the way that I can check that, in fact, is just by using another one of our visualization components here, the same one that we used in earlier videos, this df color room 2D attributes. So if I drop this onto the canvas, I can connect up the buildings, and I'll connect up the attributes. Let's see, I have the full drop down of attributes I can look at under Honeybee Energy here, this HB Room Energy attributes. And this is the one I want to look at. If I just connect up the program here, right, we're going to see, we'll get a colored visualization. Oops, I did not connect that up. I'll just connect that up there. We'll get a colored visualization, and well, we have two things previewing on top of each other here. So let me turn the preview off on this. We'll come back to that. Right, we're just seeing that everything is a large office building right now, right? So ideally, if we're serious about trying to make this model, a good representation of this urban district, we should find a way to make this ground story have a different program than the rest of the buildings. So the way to do this, there is a way to do this by deconstructing these building objects into the constituent stories that make up the building. Now, in our previous videos, we always use the building as just the unit that we were editing, but there are a set of components underneath Dragonfly, underneath the Create tab, that allow you to deconstruct the building into its sub objects. And in particular, I can use let's see, the Dragonfly deconstruct object. I'm just going to grab this component here. And you'll see what this is meant to do. It will take any input object, whether that's a story or in this case a building, and it will give you all of the individual story objects that make up that building. So we can use this deconstruction process to pull out just the ground floor and make sure that that is different than the rest of the stories, right? Make sure that it has different properties assigned to it, a different program. So the way I'm going to do this, maybe actually first I'm going to just change this to wireframe so you guys can actually see, right, the ground story, because we had two things previewing on top of each other there. So I just right clicked on this and set that to wireframe so that you can see everything's office still. And I'm going to connect up the buildings now to this deconstruct object. And I'm going to pull up a panel so that you guys can see what the output is here. And you can see we're getting now out of this a data tree. So for each building that we plugged into this, we're getting a list of stories, right? And we can see the names of these stories are kind of automatically generated already, as they are here, right? And they're all kind of basically, office as we know right now. In fact, I can just connect all these stories right to the DF, to this component, and it would still show me that. You'll see we're using multipliers in this case, right in the way that we represent these stories, but that's perfectly fine. So, all right. So the first thing I want to do, if I want to say all of these buildings make the first floor, pull out the first floor from that, I can use a native Grasshopper list item component. So if I go and I grab list item, here we go, and I pull, take our stories and connect them up to this component, you'll see that'll allow me to pull out an individual index. In this case, this is index 0. And maybe I can be a little bit more explicit about this. I'll just put a 0 inside of a panel and connect that up to there. So that now we can see we're just going to get one story for each building, just that first floor, right? That first floor that's at a different floor to ceiling height from the rest of the building, from the rest of the stories. And you know what? I mean, the scene is getting a little kind of crowded here. I'm just gonna delete this DF visualize all for now, and I'm going to connect up this to our color room to the attributes, so we can actually see indeed we are selecting out just the first story here, right? And it's still a large office building program right now, but now that we have these individual stories pulled out here, now I can start to maybe edit some of these individual story objects. And ensure that their properties are ultimately different than the rest of the building. So the way that I'll actually specify or change these stories to have a different program is that I can go under the energy tab here, and you'll see there's a component here called DF reassign energy properties. And so this component can be used to take basically any Dragonfly object like the stories that we have here, and you can reassign, you can change the program and the construction set that are assigned to those Dragonfly objects. So that's exactly what I'm going to do here. I'm not going to worry about changing the construction set. I'll keep that the same. But I'm going to plug in my first stories here. And I'm going to make a copy paste of this HB building programs drop down that I'm using to assign programs to the original building. And I'm going to go and let's say we'll set the ground floor to just be retail. We'll say that this is, I think in the real district that's here, this is a shopping mall actually. Most of the ground floors of these buildings are a shopping mall that's kind of all connected together. So all right, so I'm going to plug in retail for the program here. And you'll see out of this component, right, we're going to get story objects, that are just like the ones that we plugged in here, except that their programs have been changed. And I can double check that by plugging these stories into the DF color room to the attributes, right? So now we see, okay, instead of having the large office building program, these are getting that mix of retail programs. Okay, so that's one half of the puzzle kind of solved. Now, the other side of the thing is that I need to take all the rest of the stories of these buildings, and I need to somehow bring them together with these edited stories back into Dragonfly building objects. So in order to kind of assemble everything back into a building, there is a component here that's just called DF Buildings from Stories. And so if you drag and drop this component on the canvas, you'll see, right, this can take story objects just like what we have here, right, like our first floors, and it can join them together to bring us back to building objects. So, all right, so this is ultimately what I'm going to use. I just need to find a way to get the stories out of here that are not the first floor. So the easy way that I can do this is with a native Grasshopper component called cull index, right? In the same way that this allows us to select out a single item from a whole list, this allows us to delete an item from a whole list. So if I connect up our stories here, and then I'll connect up the same index to the I that I have here, and you'll see that'll give us everything except the first floor, of these buildings, right? And it's still a data tree, just like this first list here. But again, right now it's just everything but that first floor. And we can verify this by going in and connecting these stories up to the DF color room to the attributes. And indeed, we see, right, we're getting everything except that first floor. The program is still large office building, as I'd expect it to be. So again, so these are to represent the stories that we can join together back into buildings. So all right, so the way I'll do this, I'm going to, let's see, we'll connect up the ground floor first, and then we'll connect up I'm going to hold down Shift to connect up our these buildings on top of that. And you can see we actually, we're getting a message of probably, yeah, the lists are not aligned right here. So you'll notice actually this is going to get a little deep into Grasshopper data trees, but you'll see that actually these individual path objects that you see coming out of here are different than the ones coming out from here. So what this is basically happening is Grasshopper is having trouble realigning these lists to one another. So the easy way that we can solve this is by simplifying the outputs of these two components. You'll see that if I go to right-click on the output of this cull index component and I select Simplify, you'll see that these branches of the data tree, right, instead of being, having a bunch of semicolons in them, they're now a lot simpler from each other. I can do the same thing with the output of this component. I can just right-click and say Simplify. And again, now we're back down to just these, very simple data tree paths. And you'll see because of that, right, we're actually getting this nice aligned set of stories going into this component. And so we're actually able to get building objects again that make sense, right? Although we've lost our building names, kind of understandably, but in any case, yeah. But at least we've been able to get back buildings to the way that they were. Probably actually the easy way, if we just want to make sure that we keep the original building names, is that I'm gonna move this up, and maybe we'll, maybe we'll just double check that these buildings are what we expect. I'm gonna plug them into the color room to the attributes. And you guys will see, here we go, right? This is much more like what I was expecting. We have retail now on the ground floor, and everything else is office. So we know that we've succeeded in setting up these deconstructing and setting up the stories the way that we wanted them to. Just to make things a little easier, so we don't have like Building 91 as our names. There's just one thing I'm going to have to do to make sure, I want to make sure that these buildings, right? I'm going to essentially cast them over to text. And if I cast them to text, I want to make sure that I remove this building and semicolon. So why don't I actually just use a native Grasshopper replace text component. And I will plug in, I'm going to cast these Dragonfly buildings just to a string, right, so that I can actually use this as a name. And I'm going to, let's see, I want to replace the building semicolon part. So I'm just going to bring up a panel that has building with a semicolon and a space. And that's what I want to basically replace with nothing, which seems to be exactly what's happening here, right? So I'm just getting the words commercial 1, 2, 3. And I can now plug in these replace text for the name here. And at least, oops, you know what? I've realized I forgot something. Yep, right, I got to make sure that the data trees are aligned. So I'm going to graft the input here in order to make sure that I now have a list of lists And I can also simplify this one too to make sure, right, that it's aligned with the input stories that I'm plugging into this component, right? Uh, right, this looks exactly like the same way that we're plugging in our stories. So, all right. So we know now we've got some building objects. They've got the names that we wanted to keep here. They have, they have the stories assigned with the right programs that we were expecting. Maybe there's just one more thing. You guys will realize I didn't assign any window parameters to these commercial buildings yet. And that's because I wanted to take the opportunity to show you kind of one more thing, we'll say maybe, retail tends to be different, not just in its program from the office, right? You also tend to have nice big storefront windows whenever you have a retail program. So I'm going to set a different window ratio for the ground floor as from the rest of the stories here, the rest of the office stories. So in order to do this, let me move this over here. I'll make a little more space here. And I'm going to copy and paste our DF apply facade parameters component along with this simple window ratio so that I can then use this to apply to the stories that I have here. So, all right, and this really shows you that, right, that a Dragonfly object, doesn't necessarily have to be a building. It could also be a story. So let me see. I'm going to make sure that these ground floor retail will give them a nice high, much higher ratio around, let's say 0.6, or maybe, I don't know, maybe even 0.8 would be work, but I'll keep it at 0.6. And I can connect up my Dragonfly stories to this. Right. The one thing you'll notice though is that by default this input is being flattened, and I want to make sure I keep all this nice hierarchy so I can realign it with the ultimately with the buildings. So I'm going to turn off flatten there. And then if I look at the output of this component, right, I'm still getting stories, but oh, good. And I'm still actually getting these simplified paths, which is what I was hoping for here. So, all right, so I can just go and I can take these and use these as my stories here. Let me see. We'll do the same thing. Sorry if I'm moving stuff around here, just so you guys can see it a little more easily. Right, so I'm applying these window parameters of 0.6 to the first floor. Let me see. I'm going to copy and paste this so we can do the same thing for the office stories that we have here. Right, and we'll say the office doesn't need to have as high of a ratio as the ground floor. Maybe this is 0. Well, all right. Maybe, maybe we'll say this is 0.4. And this could be a nice 0.8. We'll make this nice and big so we can really see the difference here. Right, and so now I'm getting Dragonfly stories, right, out of this component that we still have the nice structure of the data tree, but these will have windows assigned to them. So I can go and I can now hold down Shift and connect up these as stories. So again, now I'm getting back to buildings, commercial buildings that have right, that have both the program on the ground floor set to retail and a different window ratio set for the ground floor as that's different than the upper stories. So, all right, I'm just going to kind of group these things, clean it up, and maybe we'll just do one more thing. As I said kind of in the last video, I don't want to simulate this Dragonfly model that we've built here because it's going to take a long time. It probably, even with my beefy desktop computer here, it probably would take a good hour maybe for it to finish a building with this many stories. It's just a much higher density neighborhood that we're simulating compared to the last example. But I do want to. I'm going to join these buildings again all back together into one model, right? So that we can actually take a look at what it's this model here. Maybe I should also, good practice, I should just name my model. I'm just calling this. This is close to the Massachusetts Turnpike, so I'll just call this the Mass Pike District. As I said, it's a real site. It does exist in Boston, Massachusetts, here in the U.S. But okay, and I can actually go and, just in the same way that I was previewing the individual stories and buildings, I can check the attributes of my whole model here by plugging in the model at the end here to the Room 2D attributes, right? And so we can see, right, we got retail on the ground floor, we got large office programs above those, and then we got mid-rise apartment for all the residential buildings, right? So, okay, maybe just one more thing to do diligence, right, to make sure that these window ratios have been assigned in the way that I expected them. I'm going to do one last type of visualization, the same one that we did for from building footprints. I'm going to translate my model over to a honeybee one, so that I can actually look at the ultimate window geometries that are going into our simulation models. So I'll connect up my model here. I'll export the whole district as a single honeybee model, so it's a little easier to preview. And just connect up the words district to object per model. And let's see, I'm going to run this. Take a Boolean toggle and set this run to true. And it'll take a few seconds because this is a pretty large model. But this is going to turn our essentially 2D Dragonfly objects into a 3D model here. And you can see, I guess it just took the name of the first building as the honeybee model name, for lack of a better one. In any case, I'm just using this for visualization purposes, so this is fine. I'm going to go over to the honeybee tab, honeybee visualize tab in particular, and grab this HB visualize by type. Let me see, because I don't want it to overlap with this visualization, I'm going to turn the preview off here on the DF color room 2D attributes, and I'm going to plug my honeybee model into the HB visualize by type. And so, so this is going to show me exactly what my honeybee models look like when they go off to be exported here. And you can see, we are getting the retail having a different window ratio from the stories above it. You can obviously, we're making heavy use of multipliers in the way that we've exported this model. And if I don't want to see that, I can just bring up a Boolean toggle and set use multiplier to false. And then I'll get each and every individual story exported as explicit geometry in the resulting model. And wow, this is a very big honeybee model. Yeah, but you can see, all those stories are there. One other thing to be aware of is, that all of the roofs are adiabatic. That's what that pink color means right there. And maybe all right, I know this video is run really long, but there's one last thing that I want to show you before we move on, which is that you can use under the Dragonfly Create tab, there's this component we used in the previous videos called DF Separate Top and Bottom. And if you use this, if I connected my building objects to this before connecting them up to the Dragonfly model, this would allow me to specify to ensure that the top floor always has a outdoor roof boundary condition, and the ground floor always has similarly has a ground boundary condition, unlike the interior one it has now. So just to demonstrate this quickly, I'm going to hold down Control-Shift to connect up the buildings, these buildings that I originally had going into my Dragonfly model to this one, this separate top bottom. And if I plug in my buildings back into the Dragonfly model here, this will allow us to see that the roofs are going to be, here we go. The very top floors now have outdoor boundary conditions. All the ground floors have ground boundary conditions. You'll notice, though, some of these things are not exactly as I'd expect, Ideally, I'd like a roof like this to be an outdoor roof, just like just like the ones at the very top. So this is where that separate mid option comes in on this component. You'll see if I take a toggle, a Boolean toggle, I'm going to set this to true and connect this to separate mid. You'll see this is going to use, we didn't have to use previously when we worked from footprints because, because, each and every story was pretty much identical to the ones above it. But the separate mid should allow you to, at least in these cases where the story only occupies a fraction of the entire floor plate, or the floor plate below it, you can use this to set more of those boundary conditions to be outdoors. It doesn't work for everyone, in this from building solids workflow because, in the case where you have a full story, this story is the way that it's represented right here is, is a full distance of a floor plate. So it's better to just keep that adiabatic rather than, trying to split things in that case. But in any event, this allows you to at least get a much more accurate picture of the roof geometries and those roof boundary conditions. And you'll see in the next video, we're going to actually assemble buildings from individual rooms, turning those into stories, and then turning those stories into buildings. And in that workflow, you actually see if you really want control over how exactly those different roof boundary conditions are set, you'll be able to do that in that video. So thank you again for sticking it through this relatively longer video, but hopefully now you have a really good sense of how you can build urban scale Dragonfly models from solids and how you can customize them to pull out individual stories if you want to set those to have different properties. Thank you guys again for sticking it out, and I will see you in the next one.